everyone, it's Alice, and today I'm gonna wrap up the books I read in October. This video is a little bit later than usual because I got the flu like a week and a half ago and it knocked me out. Like, I can't remember the last time I felt so ill. It was not fun, but I'm feeling much better now, so we're finally doing my October wrap up, and hopefully it'll be a while until that happens again. Although there is a lot of flu going around these days, so who knows. Anyways, I did have an alright reading month. I would have loved to squeeze some more spooky books in, but oh well, there's always next year. I am really happy though that I finally got around to reading this. I read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a literary fiction mystery novel, and it's about this group of friends who attended this elite college. They're all studying Shakespeare and they're in their final year, and something horrible happens in the group when sort of the lines between theater and life start to blur together. This is one of the most popular dark academia books, and I usually really enjoy those types of books, so I was really excited to read this. I've had it for years, and I'm really glad I finally got around to reading it, and I really liked it. I love the setting of this and the atmosphere and like the feeling of it. I think the university where this is set is very interesting. It's eccentric and one of a kind in a way. It's a very different type of school, and it almost has like a cult-like feeling to it. You see these characters exist within this very special space, and it's kind of like an isolated space in a lot of ways, and it was fascinating to see what that does to them. The friend group that we follow in here consists of 7 characters, which is a lot, and we see the story through the eyes of one of them, and he's definitely the one that we get to know the best. We do get to know all of the other ones as well, but not as much as maybe I would have liked. Although I do feel like it makes sense because everything that we see is through the main character's eyes, and everything is colored by his opinions and thoughts and his relationships with the other people in the group. He's not as close with everyone, so it makes sense that we don't see all of them as much, I guess. I think I would have liked to know a little bit more about all of them though, but I think this book does a really good job of capturing tensions within the group. Like, I felt like that was done really well. There is also a mystery element in here that worked maybe even better than I had expected, actually. The story is sort of structured in a way where we meet the main character like years after everything has happened, and then he tells the story of what happened to another person. And you sort of go into the story with some of the puzzle pieces, and then throughout the story everything sort of comes together, and I felt like that was done really well, and I really enjoyed it. Now, if you saw the reading vlog that I did all about reading this book, you will know that when I was reading this, couldn't help but compare it to The Secret History, which is one of my favorite books. And I think if you've read The Secret History, it's very difficult not to compare the two because there are so many similar themes and tropes, and it's just very similar in a lot of ways. And so I had The Secret History in the back of my mind while I was reading this, and because it's one of my favorite books, it did sort of color my experience of this a little bit. I think if I had read this before The Secret History, it would have made a much bigger impact on me, but I have read The Secret History, and so I couldn't help but compare it. I would call this, and I mean this in the best way, and I said this in the vlog as well, I would call this The Secret History light. It's like a lighter version of that kind of story. The writing feels a little bit lighter, and the story doesn't feel as dark. For me, like, my personal preference leans more towards The Secret History. Like, I lean more towards that like really dark and heavy and almost kind of dense and slow writing and story, and I feel like The Secret History goes like deep. This is a lighter sort of version of that kind of story, which I actually think is fantastic, because if you like these types of stories but you don't get on with The Secret History, which I totally understand that not everyone does, this is a great alternative. I'm super happy that I read this though, and although it's not a new all-time favorite book. It is one of my favorite books that I've read this year, I think. It was really solid, and I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't give it a 5 out of 5 because it didn't really do anything more than I had expected. It didn't surprise me in any way, and that's not always a bad thing. It just means for me, like this time, it didn't quite reach the top. It's a very solid novel though, and I really, really liked it. It's the kind of book that I think I'm gonna reread. And also, if you want to hear more thoughts about this book, you can check out the vlog that I did. I will leave a link to it somewhere, and you can get more in-depth thoughts and like what it was like when I was reading it. Secondly, I read a book that was, well, it was this book. It was The Butcher and the Wren by Elena Urquhart. This is like a mystery thriller novel, and it's about this medical examiner in Louisiana and the serial killer that she is hunting by sort of examining his trail of victims. I'm gonna keep my review of this short and just short. I got this book because the author of this is a co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, and because she has like a true crime podcast and she has like experience within the medical field, I thought that this had some potential. For me, it didn't reach any of that potential, and I know that this is kind of brutal, but I just don't think this is done very well. The characters are very one-dimensional, barely even that. The plot is not great, and like the setting should be interesting, but it's really not captured very well, besides just being like, all it says is that it's hot all the time, and there's just nothing here. The only good thing about this really is that it's a very quick read, and that's kind of it for me. This was just not for me at all, and I think that there are so many other good mystery thrillers out there that there's no reason to pick this one up. I gave it 1 star, which I realize is harsh, but I also want to be honest. I don't think this is very good. Moving on though, we have got a book that I did think was good. It was great even. It is a new favorite book of mine. It's Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulson. This is a graphic novel, and it's about this character named Garlic who lives in a town of vegetable folk, and she's friends with this witch named Agnes, and she's very sweet but also kind of anxious and a little stressed. And then a vampire moves into the neighborhood, and because Garlic is garlic, someone suggests that she should go confront him. So she does. This is the sweetest thing that I have read in so long that I just couldn't help but fall in love with it. It's just so wholesome and just lovely. Now, this is not a revolutionary story by any means, I will admit that. It's probably very predictable, but I just think the story is so wonderful. I just loved the characters. I loved seeing this little village. I love this little adventure that they go on, and I don't know, I just thought it was wonderful. I also really like the art style. The art does a lot for this book. I love the way that the characters are drawn and how their emotions are captured, and the whole color palette of this book is very autumnal, which obviously I love. It's just a very, very cute book, and I did also read this when I was starting to get sick. I felt a little bit sorry for myself, and this cheered me up a lot. So I think that the timing was also perfect for me, but I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. It's perfect if you want something cute and cozy and wholesome and just something easy. Lastly, for October, we do have a little bit of a spooky book. I read House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This is a horror novel, and it's about these 3 sisters who, when they were young, they disappeared for an entire month. They just disappeared out of nowhere and then reappeared out of nowhere, and no one knows where they went or what happened. They came back looking the same, but since they came back, there's been a little bit of a weirdness to them, and there's a lot of odd stuff going on. And we follow the youngest of the sisters in here and what happens when the eldest sister disappears again. Now, I don't read a lot of horror, so I don't have a lot of experience with the genre, but I think that this is the kind of horror that I could get into. This genuinely like creeped me out in parts, although it did lose me a little bit towards the end. One of my favorite things about this was definitely the dark fairy tale vibe. It has this atmosphere that is just great. I also really liked reading about all of the weird stuff that was happening. Like, I like when you're reading something and you're like, what was that? And it's like creepy and almost kind of disgusting, but you can't stop reading. I think the writing does a lot of good in here, and I especially, like, this was the thing that I noticed when I was reading this. It's really good at describing scents and smells, which for some reason, in books when that sense is described in this kind of way, it adds a layer of like creepiness to it that's very like difficult to explain. I've had this in a couple of books, but the way it describes smells in here just adds a layer to it that I really like. I also really like how at the center of the story is these three sisters, and seeing their different dynamics was very interesting. There is something about sisters that I just think is very interesting to read about, and these sisters are placed in these circumstances that are very like weird and different, but I felt like the way that they reacted and the way that they were in these situations made sense, and I liked reading about the different dynamics and the tension and just that like sibling relationship. I just think is very interesting. I very much enjoyed reading this, and I was really invested up until the last like third, where we're reaching the climax of the story and we're figuring out what is going on. For some reason, I won't say that it didn't work, because it probably did, it just didn't work for me. For some reason that just pulled me out of the story a little bit, and the way that it ended made this a more forgettable book than it felt in the first 2/3. So it lost a little bit of its magic for me. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a 4-star for the first 2 parts, and then it just dipped a little bit at the end for me. But I did really enjoy this, and it's been a long time since I've read a book that's like genuinely creeped me out, so that was really good. Okay everyone, those are all the books that I read in October. I'd love to know what you all have been reading for the past couple of weeks, and as always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!